Welcome back to another video on OS operations. The project we will work on in this lecture is going to be a directory cleanup script. As you can see here, we have a lot of files, Word files, JPEG files that are still laying around in our folder completely unorganized. What we want to do is put all of them into their respective folders. So we will create folders for each of them, and then the script will put them into their respective folders. Our script will have an optional path argument which we can use to define which directory to clean up. By default, this will be the current directory. So let's quickly implement this argument parser we did in the last section as well, and you should still know how to use that. If not, just go back to the other video and check it out. Once we've implemented the argument parser, let's go ahead and print something to the console and see if everything is working fine. So if we provide a path, we can see the path being printed, and if we just call the script without any path, because it's optional, it will use the dot directory, which is the current directory we're in. The next step is also something we did before, so we want to get all the files of a given directory. Looking back, we can still do that with the os.listener method by giving it some path. We also want to get the path.dir content as we did before by joining our path in our document so that we have the full qualified path instead of just the name of the file. One thing we want to do differently here is that we not only want to get the files, but also get the folders. So what we're going to do here is do the isFile and isDir methods of the os.path method. Let's print the two variables and see if everything works correctly. It tells us that our directory has one folder and 650 files, which is correct in this case. One interesting little piece of knowledge I can give you here is how to create so many files with increasing numbers. So what you can do is you can, for example, touch a name, like you create a document and then pass curly braces and add these two dots here. So if you do 0 to 100 and then append, for example, file extension .java, in this case it will create the files, the Java files from 0 to 100 without any problem. So remember, in this statement, the curly braces with the numbers and the two dots are the most important part. Let's go back and re-execute our script to see that now we have 751 elements instead of 650. We are now ready to go back to our script and continue working on our implementation. Let's add some logging here in order to know what's going on in our script, and then start to go through all the files and move them into their according folders. So we'll use a for loop again and separate the name from the file extension as we did before. So full doc path and file type from the split text method. Then our doc path will be the dir name of our full doc path, and the doc name will be the base name of our full doc path. We've seen this before in the previous video, so if you cannot understand what we're doing here, let's go back and check that out. Since we can also execute the Python script in our current folder, we need to make sure that we don't clean up the directory cleanup script itself. So let's add an if statement and skip this file. Since we want to clean up all the files into their respective folders, we first have to create those subfolders with the given file name before we can actually move the documents into them. So as the first step, let's define the subfolder path by using the os.path.join method. The two elements we want to combine here is the path given by the user and the text of our file type. And one simple thing you can see here is that we can simply omit the dot of our text by using the array accessing methodology of using one colon and then nothing, and this will get rid of the dot in front of our text. And we use the dot lower method to make sure that it doesn't matter what kind of text we have behind the dot. So if it's txt, lowercase, uppercase, whatever, it will all move it to just txt in order to create that folder. Let's start to actually create our subfolders. We'll use this subfolder path to make sure that our to be created folder is not already in our folder, so that the folder does not exist already. After the check, we then try to use the os.makeDir method to create our path at the given subfolder path. As always, let's not forget to add logging so we can understand what our script is doing, and in this case we need to add an except statement because we use the try method. If we hover over our method, we can see some information and some errors, but not the one we are searching for. So let's do a Google search and check for the Python os.makeDir error that's being raised. Here we can see the error I was searching for, file exists error. So whenever the folder already exists, we get a file exists error, and we can catch that and give the user some information about that. Let's go back to our terminal and re-execute our script in order to see the changes we are doing. So we get a file not found error, no such file or directory. And in this case, let's go back to our script and try to debug what we did wrong. The mistake I did here was to again use the path in our path join method in the os.makeDir method. So in this case, we only need the subfolder path because we already concatenated the path we're going to use. So let's remove that part and go back to our terminal and re-execute our script. And we can now see a few more error messages, but those are because we always try to create folders even though they already exist. So let's go back to our folder and see if it worked. And here we can see all the folders for all the file types in that specific folder. Since it's always trying to create the same folder over and over again, we need some way to actually let the script know that we already created those folders. So what we will do in our case is simply add an array that keeps track of the folders that have already been created. We can then add the folder path to that array and check if our folder has already been created in our if statement above. Let's go back to our folder and delete all the folders that have already been created to check our script. Go back to terminal, re-execute, and here we can see that all the folders have now been created once. Going back to our folder, let's check if our folders are there, and here we can see that we need to clean up by name for macOS, and now we can see that our folders are there. We have one more little error message here, which is kind of weird, but let's check how to find that by printing the file name of our specific error messaging execution. The problematic file is the .dsstore file that is used on macOS. In order to take care of that, and in order to take care of all the hidden files that are starting with a dot, we need to create some additional if condition or if condition checking to make sure that we don't run into the same problem with files like .git and stuff like that. So let's first add this if condition and print our document if it starts with a dot. We can now see that the ds-store is used, so let's move that check to the continue statement below and re-execute our script. Here we can see that we now don't get any errors and our folders are all created perfectly fine. Let's retry that one more time to make sure that we actually get all the files and folders in place. It looks good, so let's check back, and now we have all the folders created without any error messages, and we also have some additional error checking in place. The last step should be a piece of cake because we already did some renaming before in a previous lesson. And yes, in order to move files, we're going to use renaming instead. So we're going to simply rename them to the new document path in order to move them to the new location inside this subfolder. And again, we're using the os.path.join method together with the os.rename in order to do that, like in the last lecture. And then add some final logging, some final print statements to make sure that we get information about our whole execution and where the problems might occur. Since everything looks good now, let's go back to our script and check our output. We can see that 750 of the 751 files have been renamed, and we can also see that a lot of the files have been moved. Let's observe the behavior a little bit closer and check if actually the path is going to be added. So we can see that Java is added before document8.java here, and if everything works fine, we can now remove the hashtag in front of the os.rename and actually rename our files into the new folders. Before we finalize our script, let's change the logging here because it now says that a folder already exists instead of just some error. Now we are ready to go back and re-execute our script. We can see that there are no errors and all the files have been put into their respective folders. Let's check some of them. So if we click on the docx version, we can see all the Word files being in there. JPEG has all JPEG files and so on. As you can hopefully see, we reused a lot of the information, a lot of the knowledge we gained in the first lecture. Again, let's quickly go over our script and recap what we learned here. So again, we use the OS and argparse libraries in order to make sure that we get the behavior we want to have. The os.path.isFile and isDir methods have been really useful in order to make sure that we have the folders in the directory in one place. We kept track of the already created folders by using a simple array and doing an in checking. Also, we made sure that we avoid all the hidden files and folders with a dot beginning, and then try to create a folder with the os.makeDir method at our subfolder path. The last step then was to use our renaming method to rename our files to the new folders. This concludes our directory cleanup script. Let's go ahead and create more.